I think if you ask any member of the public what they think of social care, and they'll probably come up with some of these phrases. They'll think about old age, they'll think about isolation, they'll talk about illness, they'll talk about uncertainty. And I think if you then go on to talk to journalists, people in the media, and ask them the same question, and forgive me, there are many in this room, then I think what you'll get are questions, phrases like this: demographic time bombs, spending black holes. The language is cast in those terms. And I think it's for those reasons it's very little wonder why many older people feel increasingly like second-class citizens. Instead of celebrating the fact that people are living longer, society somehow seems inconvenienced by it, dismissing the human ingenuity that is delivering longer life, not as a triumph, but as a problem to be fixed. Now, our older population, I think, should never be regarded as a burden on our society. We're living longer and healthier lives than ever, and we should celebrate that and keep remembering that. It's the success, therefore, that demands a new settlement, and one that looks at the opportunities of an ageing society, one that seeks to unlock the rich potential of our older population, one that treats the frail and the elderly with respect, and one that seeks to recognise the opportunities in an ageing society. And right now, what I want to do is say a bit about the current state of social care. What are the challenges that any policymaker, any minister in my position has to confront? Well, let's just set the context. Right now, local councils decide how to spend money on care and support. They're able to tune in to local needs and local circumstances. And this means that there can be significant differences between the care and support from one area to another. Access to support can also vary depending on where people live, even when the level of need may be identical. And all of this leads to a system where people are left confused about what help they actually will receive. And I think this complexity is one of the reasons that people don't always think ahead, don't always plan how they will pay for their care and the needs that they have as part of the natural process of growing older. Now, none of us know if we will need care in the first place. None of us will know whether we actually will need it in the future. And indeed, most of us don't have a clue how much it will cost until we find ourselves in the situation of having to pay for it. But what we do know is that if we do need care, one in four of us will face care costs of more than £50,000 for our lifetime. And that 1 in 10 of us will be unlucky enough to face care costs of in excess of £100,000 in our old age. This is social care's nasty little secret. But social care doesn't just matter because of the costs. It matters because it goes to the very heart of our society. A society where families care for one another, from grandparents caring for their grandchildren, to husbands and wives caring for each other, to sons and daughters dedicated to caring for and looking after their parents. In that sense, families are and remain the bedrock of care. So let me be clear, that doesn't mean that I believe it's the business of government to force people to care for their loved ones. But it is the business of government to help them to do so, making sure that quality and outcomes are the benchmark of success, breaking down those barriers between services to ensure that they can be personalised and joined up. And it's that which has really been the focus of this government's work over the last 12 months, laying some groundwork for the reform of social care. Let me just set out what that groundwork actually is. First, the spending review last year, which secured an extra £2 billion for social care by 2014, a total of £7.2 billion extra support for social care over the next 4 years, and an unprecedented transfer of funds from the NHS to social care, with a very, very clear intention of helping to drive those relationships between the two to get them working together much better than ever before, and a recognition in that sense that health and social care are two sides of the same coin. Now, of course we can, and I'm sure in the questions later we will, debate whether the spending review was enough. And I certainly acknowledge and recognise that there are pressures out there. But I think the purpose behind the spending review settlement that this government provided for social care was to stabilise social care, was to build a bridge between a broken social care system and a reformed one. Now, the second area of laying the foundations for reform is around what is the government's vision for social care? What can social care actually achieve? And that was why last November I set out the government's vision for social care, a vision grounded in some important values which need, I think, to inform the way in which policy goes forward. Values of self-determination, reciprocity and personal responsibility, demonstrating that social care isn't just about reaching out and rescuing social casualties, but is about relationships. It's about building capable communities. It's about unlocking people's potential. It's about preventing and postponing dependency. Now, giving people more choice and control over their care through personal budgets, and Michelle rightly talked about this, putting individuals in the driving seat, allowing them to decide what services they need to carrying on living independently and meeting their care and support needs. And that's why the vision that we set out gave a commitment, a very clear commitment, that everyone eligible should be given a personal budget, preferably by a direct payment, by 2013. And we also want to make sure that people get real choice and control in the way in which councils roll out those personal budgets, that they aren't just seen as a tick box exercise, that we have to look at the content and quality of what is being provided as well, and we need to see more choice and innovation in the care market to deliver that. And supporting families to care means also taking steps to identify more carers. We can't ignore the fact there is still a huge hidden army of carers out there who are unknown to the authorities and therefore do not get the support that they could receive. So we have already set out clear priorities to give them greater support to lead full and rewarding lives outside of their caring role so that they can stay healthier and indeed become wealthier as a result of that. That's our vision for social care. But the problems we also face are ingrained very, very deeply indeed in an outdated and confused set of social care laws. The product, in fact, of 60 years of piecemeal legislating that means social care looks back rather than forward. It looks back to principles set at the time of the Poor Law rather than to modern liberal principles of today. The Law Commission's 76 recommendations offers the prospect of a modern statute grounded in those values that we set out in the government's vision, placing well-being and outcomes at the heart of a 21st century social care system. Now, one of the challenges is striking a balance between greater personalisation and personal control and effective safeguarding of people who might be vulnerable. And that's an area where the Law Commission has made some very helpful recommendations which the government is already committed to act upon. We will be looking at how we can strengthen safeguarding arrangements in local authorities to increase the protection that the most vulnerable people in our society have. And that's why making adult safeguard boards mandatory as a requirement on local authorities will make them more effective at ensuring those risks of harm and exploitation are addressed. And by making this change and placing through it a clear set of responsibilities, not just on local councils, but on the police and the NHS to work in partnership and have collective accountability to their communities for working in such a way, we can send, I think, an important signal about the importance we attach to safeguarding. Now, of course, there is then the question of how we deal with funding, and I guess that's probably why everyone's here today. Last July, we set out for Andrew Dilnot a key challenge that was set for him and his two fellow commissioners. It was to answer this question: how do we strike a fair balance between the individual's responsibility and the state in funding care and support? Now, I think that was the right question then. I think it's the right question now. So let me add just a few thoughts about next week's announcement. I think Andrew and his fellow commissioners have been very blunt. Reform comes with a price tag. And there is no magic solution that can shield people from catastrophic costs, instantly reward their thrift, and make a rotten system fair. That is why when Andrew spells out his plans next week, it may not be very easy. Because without personal contact, without personal experience, our social care system remains largely out of sight and out of mind for most people. That's why, just as in fact yesterday reported in many media outlets, the survey commissioned by the Anchor Housing Association, an ICM survey, revealed that most people think social care is free. It's not free. It never has been, and it never, ever will be free. And I agree with those who have said that the boat has sailed on a wholly tax-funded social care system. So when Andrew tells us that he has an answer to social care funding, that all but the poorest will have to pay, the reaction might be a bit lukewarm at best. And there are, after all, no cheers for the bearers of hard truths. And in a way, that's what Andrew will be presenting to us next week. Hard truths about the truth about social care. So those of us who seek reform must be united in a common purpose, because we must make sure people don't look at Dilnot's plans through rose-tinted glasses, comparing his plans with a fantasy of free care, because it does not exist. So let me speak plainly. If funding reform is to be secured during this Parliament, it will require give and take. It will demand recognition of the times in which we are working and the fact that the deficit casts a long shadow. So along with funding reform, we have to address the wider, bigger picture, the picture that Michelle was talking about. Funding reform on its own is essential, but it's not sufficient. The question that the government put to Andrew is just one of the questions that needs to be answered. The events that are unfolding at Southern Cross pose questions about the market in care. The abuse scandal, the terrible abuse scandal at Winterbourne View, raises questions about safety, about commissioning, about regulation. The Law Commission has posed questions about social care law itself. And we need to address questions of quality, regulation, and integration, as well as law reform and funding. There are examples, quite clearly around this country, of poor care. But there are also many, many examples of truly excellent care provided by dedicated, caring workers in the care sector. But there are also examples of where care falls short, and falls well short of what any of us in this room, what I personally would expect for our loved ones. And we need to ensure, therefore, consistently good quality care is provided to all. To get the right reform requires, therefore, an open dialogue. And that dialogue has already started. Work that we're doing in the department, engaging with many of you that I've seen in meetings that I've attended recently. And I hope that the King's Fund and Age UK, professional bodies and others, provider organisations and charities, will continue to work with us as we work through these challenging questions. Now, I know that there are many questions still unanswered, and most of them will have to wait when it comes to funding questions until Andrew Dilnot publishes his report and makes his recommendations next week. But I want to be clear about one thing. Next week, don't expect the government's final word on funding reform. The Dilnot report marks an important milestone on the road to reform, but there are more milestones to come. There are challenges on the way, but I genuinely and firmly believe that by working together across the sector, by making sure people do understand what the reality of social care is rather than the fantasy, we can finally begin a process of turning the page on social care reform and deliver something that is probably more precious than money, but is absolutely vital in what people want when it comes to social care, and that is peace of mind. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.